Welcome back to Bookworm. We've got another little bit different type of episode for you today. We will be discussing the book Step by Chris Capehart, and we actually have Chris on the podcast. So welcome to Bookworm, Chris.
Hey, thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I actually met Chris at the Christian Men's Network conference. I think that was last November down in Dallas. And Chris spoke about the process of writing his book and some of the key takeaways from his book. And it really resonated with me because I feel like my story is very similar where, Chris, I'll let you kind of tell your story, but you were doing something and then you had this vision. And rather than just say, oh, I wish I had time to do this, you kind of made the time to do it, which is really what your book is all about. So I picked this book originally before we knew we were going to have you on because I really liked the idea of it. I've read through the whole thing after I brought it home from Dallas. Really liked it, and I think that it's very appropriate for the Bookworm audience. But why don't you tell us a little bit, just very high level, we'll get into some of the details later, but the overview process of how you actually wrote the book, how the book came to be.
Sure. Well, Mike, I'll tell you, it's been something I've been wanting to do for a long time. And I knew I was going to write, and I've been talking about and thinking about the topics I was going to write on, and always knew one of the things I was going to write on is how to help other people go after and start doing the things that they've always wanted to do and accomplish the things they've always wanted to accomplish. And I'd been not doing it myself. And one day I sat there and I said, man, I know what I want to write about, and it's helping people get started and go and do the things they need to be doing, and I am not even doing it myself, so I really should get going on this. And so for me at the time, I was running a tech company called Oven Bits to do a lot of development for large companies across the world. And so I worked quite a bit, and I traveled quite a bit, and the whole concept of the book Step is about taking steps. I know we'll get more into that. But what I did is I found my step and I said, look, I don't know how long it's going to take. It's not the perfect situation. The circumstances aren't all perfect, but I can find 2 hours a week. And for me, it was 7 to 8 a.m. at a coffee shop outside of my office, or typically in a hotel room across the world somewhere, sometimes 6 a.m. And it was that Tuesday and Thursday. And I did that for more or less 2 years. And so I wrote the book while I was also doing all these other things. And that's kind of the tagline of the book is how to pursue your dreams in the midst of everyday life. And I was basically doing everyday life from my job, my company, my family. I have a young daughter and wife. And so I was doing everyday life, but at the same time, I was pursuing this dream that frankly, most people would think I didn't have time for. And my big thing and my big encouragement to people, and one of the reasons I wrote the book, is that I believe that we all have time to do the things we dream, the things we want to do, and start taking steps towards those things. And sometimes we just don't realize it. Sometimes we don't realize how powerful that step can truly be. And so that was kind of the process for me of jumping into this, is finally getting to the point where I realized, man, I've been talking about the fact that I want to really help people do this thing, and I've not been doing it because I've been using the same excuses I'm trying to challenge other people to get over. And so I started doing that, and that journey started, I guess it's almost maybe 3.5 years ago now, when I first took that first step and got to the coffee shop in Dallas, Texas at 7 a.m. the first morning and opened up my computer and said, okay, what am I going to write? So that's a little bit of my story. There's a lot more to it, which I'm looking forward to getting into. But Mike, that's the high level on why I wrote it, how I wrote it, and how we got to where we are today.
That is awesome. And I mean, it's very much in line with my story. And what I really liked when I heard you tell me that story in Dallas was the fact that I'm not weird, basically, that other people are doing the same thing. Because I was getting up early and writing at a coffee shop before going to work also. I guess a lot of books get written in coffee shops in the early morning.
Nice. I love that your story is about you wanted to write a book, and you had the difficulty of coming up with the motivation and everything to do it, and yet your book is about writing a book in a sense. It's very meta in that I'm reading a book about writing a book. It's very cool, and I like that. And because I really like it because there's a lot of folks out there who have these aspirations of writing books. It seems like everybody I talk to feels like they have a book in them. They feel like they have some story or something that they want to share with the world, and they don't ever take that first step to get it to get it done. And it's fun to read a book about writing a book and how to make that happen. So thank you for that.
Oh, you're very welcome. I think you're right. Everybody does have a story. It's something I talk about a lot. We all have a story, and that story will impact someone. Some of our stories, maybe it's 10 people or 5 people or 1,000,000 people. You really don't know. But at the end of the day, we all do have that story, and I'm just trying to encourage people to write that story, whether it be a book, whether it be a different type of a dream or a company they want to start or something with their family. I want people to write that story and realize that they can do it. And I think that's been my big goal. So yeah, thanks for saying that, because that's really a lot of the reason behind why I did it.
There's actually some statistics that I found when I was putting together a deep work webinar for Asian efficiency. And there was a study that said that 81% of Americans feel they have a book in them and that they should write it. And at the time the survey was done, that comes out to around 200 million books. But there are 80,000 that get published every year, which means that 0.4% actually do it. The rest just talk about it and never find their step, like you said, Chris. So I'm kind of curious. You made it sound when you that phrase, you found your step. It's like this thing that you have to discover, and like the light bulb goes on, and aha, this is the thing. But I know for me personally, the process wasn't quite that simple. So maybe you can kind of talk us through how you found your step.
Yeah, well, and let me say that's the reason when I talk about step as a general concept, everybody goes, "Oh, well, yeah, that makes sense." And then they ask, "Well, why do you have 200 plus pages about it in a book?" I said, "Well, because it's not always as straightforward as you think. Like it is very simple, but at the same time, it's very difficult and very challenging." And I think one of the things that happens to a lot of us is, we look at, and in the book I talk about something called the proverbial mile. And the proverbial mile is just what I label as the infinite distance between you and the person you want to be or the thing you want to achieve. And in this context, the books that people want to write. And you have this big mile. And I remember sitting at the beginning of it and thinking, okay, I've got to somehow get a couple hundred pages written. Not only written, they've got to be good. They've got to be edited. They've got to go through this thing. And it just looks crazy. Like it's so far away. I didn't per se see myself as a writer at that point. And so I looked at all these things and I'm going, where do I start? Where do I start? You want to have a full agenda. You want to have your full list of this is that chapter, this is that chapter, this is that chapter, how you're going to do everything. So I didn't have any of that. And I couldn't figure it out, frankly. And this is what I think I love to talk to people about. I didn't know what chapters I was going to write. All I knew when I sat down to start writing was this. I knew that if I was going to write a book that had any amount of pages, the first thing I had to do was write a page. And as I know with all books, and this is with everything we do in life, pretty much anything of any significance that's ever done has edits and rewrites as a part of it. So if I took out the pressure of being perfect the first time, if you will, on my first step, and just said, well, if I got to write 200 or 300 pages, I got to at least write one page. So I might as well just start with that. And for me, I have a whole concept I talk about breaking down the mile into the steps, and I talk about how every single mile is made up of feet, inches, yards, the things we know. And our challenge is getting our eye off of the mile and finding those steps inside of the mile. And there's a lot of different strategies and techniques to doing that, but a lot of it is just realizing that you've got to take every single one of the steps that are a part of that mile to go the whole mile. And so you shouldn't overlook the small steps and not take them because you think you got to do something much more big or impactful if you think it is, like write a whole chapter at a time. Writing a chapter at a time can be actually pretty difficult, but writing a page, that's pretty doable. You could sit down and write a page. I mean, if you look at a page of a book once it's done, I mean, it's only a couple of paragraphs. And so for me, Mike, when we talk about this, talk about how do you find that step? A lot of it was just that. It's really basic in the beginning. It's those small things that you can break down inside of your mile that you've got to get done. And you may not even know how to correctly form, in this case, like a chapter, using this example of writing a book. You may not know how to even write a full chapter, but you can start with that page, and then you can even break it down smaller and start with that first sentence and go from there, because as you take one step, you can build on that step. And I've always been a big believer that as we take a step or as we take an action towards anything, we start to see other actions we can take. And then there's other things, and we can get into this. I don't want spill all the beans right here, right now, but we can talk about ways when we find it hard to find that first step to do it, either through a tool that I have in the book or through other people, other perspectives and things like that. But really for me, that's what it's about. It's about finding the things that you actually already probably know to do, but you're not doing them because you don't think they'll be impactful enough in doing those things.
That's so good. Yeah, most people I think just realize that this is such a simple thing. How can this possibly add up to me having a book written? One of the quotes from the book, I didn't write down the page number, but you said, if you can't quite believe you can achieve the thing you desire, find the thing you do believe you can do and start there, which, like you said, for writing the book was not writing a chapter, but breaking that down even further and writing a page. For me, I didn't even put a quantity on there. I just created the time and space, and it was a time period. I'm going to show up at 5 a.m. every day, and I'm going to write for an hour, and whether I get 1,000 words or 100 words doesn't matter. I just need to do this consistently, and that's the key. Is like showing up once and writing a page. That's no big deal, but if you crease that into your schedule and you create regular time, like you said, 2 hours a week, even that's not a lot of time. Pretty much anyone can find 2 hours a week to pursue their dream or their vision, and then you just got to do it consistently. Just show up every day, like Sean Blanc has said, and the results take care of themselves at that point.
Yeah, and one thing I'll add to that is this, even you're right, 2 hours a week is not difficult to find. You can find that time. You can sacrifice a little bit of sleep, a little bit of fun, whatever it is to find that time. And here's where people get tripped up, because you said it's right. It's consistency over time. But here's what happens. People start, they do the 2 hours, they do it 1 week, they do it the next week, they do it the next week, and then they miss it. And they miss it, and they feel like they've crashed their entire dream. When, just like you said, 2 hours isn't a lot to find. When you mess up, getting right back up and doing the 2 hours the next week is not hard to do, and you can get right back on track. And one of the things I really like to encourage people, and I want to say it straight off, is you're not going to be consistent all the time. I'm a very disciplined, consistent person, probably to the extreme. And there were weeks and times where I didn't write as a part of this because things happen and life comes up. And so even finding those 2 hours was difficult for me at times. But I got back up and I started doing it again. And so that consistency over a period of time, even if I messed up on one step, if you will, or 1 week or 2 weeks, didn't stop me from getting back up. And I think that's a really important message for people to hear, because some people hear that message, you do it and do it over and over and over again. And that's my message. But I also want to tell people, if you mess up, that's okay. Just as 2 hours is not going to, you're not going to accomplish your whole goal in 2 hours. You got to do it over time. If you miss 2 hours, you're not going to lose your momentum either.
Chris, something that you had said was that this is a really simple concept, and people are like, why is there 200 pages here? And I almost hesitate to say this with the author of the book on the show, but it's like, okay, this book really frustrated me because of that. It's like, okay, this is crazy simple. Yeah, I get it. Okay, figure out what the next step is and go do it. Great. Now what? Like, that was kind of my first instinct on it, and yet I found that after like 2 or 3 days of reading into it, I found myself like, wait a second, I've got these other 2 big goals here that I don't even know what the first step is. It's like, okay, all right, you win. I needed this. It's like, okay, so it was frustrating in one sense that this is incredibly simple, and yet we don't take the time to stop and think about it in this way. And I think you're dead on that if we stopped long enough to quantify it and say, okay, here's what I'm planning to do, and it's going to take me 2 years to pull this off. Great. What does that mean for the next 24 hours or even the next 20 minutes?
Yeah.
Break it down that far. That was a big takeaway for me. Like, okay, I've got these big goals. What does that mean right now? And it made me think, are you familiar with Getting Things Done with David Allen?
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
Okay. I immediately started thinking of his, what's the next action? Like, I immediately thought of that.
Yeah.
So I think it plays in really well with that whole framework.
Yeah, and I've heard the statement said, it's funny, there's the statement that there's nothing new under the sun, right? But what I've also heard in self-development in this world is that we need to hear the same thing over and over again, just like we need consistency to accomplish anything. We need to hear the same thing over and over again, and typically need to hear it from different perspectives. And a lot of the principles that I have in here, I think, do really align very well with books that have been written, over the ages that really help people and have hallmarks of these principles inside of them. But it's just taking those same principles and rephrasing them in a new light, in a new way, where hopefully people are encouraged to see things from a different perspective, and that different perspective can give them the motivation and the encouragement to realize they can do it.
That's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was a huge roadblock for me when it came to really creating anything for a very long time. I'm also a musician. I play guitar and I sing on the worship team at my church. And I've always had a passion for writing songs. And for a while, I would write songs and then I'd be proud of what I produced. And then at the end, I would realize that I took the chord progression or the melody from this other song and I didn't even realize it. And I get frustrated, be like, oh man, I can't come up with anything. And then I had a revelation when I read this book, Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. And he basically said that you are the sum total of all of your different inputs, all your different experiences. And when you create something new, all you are doing is you are connecting the dots in a way that hasn't been done before. But the dots are not completely original. You're not getting these completely out of right field. These are things that other people have said, other different ways, like you were saying. And then when you put your own spin on it, you are creating something original that can resonate with somebody who, like Getting Things Done, for example, Joe, you brought that up. There's a lot of people who read that book and they don't get it. Some people just completely love it. Personally, it was pretty transformational in my productivity journey. It illuminated a lot of light bulbs for me. But I know people who read it and they're just like, this is dry, this is boring, I completely don't get it. They'll read something like Step and they'll be like, yeah, I can totally do this.
You just never know. You just never know.
Yeah, so for everybody who's listening who maybe has encountered that same situation, don't be discouraged by the fact that somebody else has said something a little bit differently than how you would say it. That doesn't mean that you have nothing of value to add to the conversation.
It's true. And if you look at, so the world I live in is development and writing code. And it's very common to have an idea for, say, a new website, a new web app of some sort, and you want to go figure out what the marketplace looks like. And inevitably you find 4 or 5 that already exist. It happens all the time. Development is a very hot and fast-moving industry. So it's very easy to find things that already exist. The trick is finding one that isn't doing real well and try to become a competitor. So that's my take on it anyway.
And Joe, one really great example, if you're in the tech world, obviously I am as well. There was, a product called HipChat by Atlassian, which is still out there and does really well for chat communication. And then something came around called Slack. And Slack is really, frankly, the same thing, but just done, what a lot of people would say a little bit better. And they just exploded and they took off. And so, listen, at the end of the day, yeah, I think things have always been done and they've been done a certain way. Our job is to go find those things, make them better, make them easier for people. And I think this is done in software, like you said, all the time, because you got so many guys out there doing it. I think it's done in books all the time too. And it's good. We need it. We need to hear the same message over and over again, just like we need to do the same things over and over again to get results that we want. And using other people and other people's creative as motivation to help spur our ideas is, I think, one of the best things we can do.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to go back to something that you said regarding the consistency, because you mentioned that just like 2 hours a week isn't going to instantly get you to your goal. When you fail, that's not instantly going to break all of the momentum that you had built towards accomplishing that goal. And I think on page 54, there's a key here. You wrote that we will only accomplish our goals if we create our feelings instead of letting them create us. And I'm hypothesis here, from my own personal experience, I'd love to get your view on this as well, is that when you fail, instantly you get those emotions and those feelings that say, see, you'll never be able to do this. And the key is to not let that voice be the loudest. And like you said on page 54, you have to create your feelings rather than letting them create you. You have to say, no, look at what I've done, and then allow that to create the feeling of, yes, I can accomplish this. Look at, I'm doing this, rather than, oh, look, you failed. Oh, you're right. I guess because I feel this way, I am a failure.
Yeah. And, I'm a really big believer that our actions dictate our results, and our actions also dictate our feelings. So a lot of times we think of feelings and we think of them as just this, I don't know, mystical thing that happened to us and we have no control over. But if you really start to evaluate your feelings, there's always some kind of preceding event or action that caused those feelings. And so in order to change your feelings, you need another event or action to change those feelings. And what a lot of people don't realize is that we have control to do that. I think I share this in the book, but it's one of the examples. I actually heard this said a little bit differently, originally at a marriage conference with my wife. And one of the things that the gentleman was talking about is he was just saying that, hey, look, when you don't feel in love, because you won't always feel in love with your wife, act like you're in love, act like you would when you feel in love. So maybe you had a fight and you're coming home from work, and the last thing you want to do is stop and get flowers or do something nice for your wife. Do that and see how you feel once you do it. And you'll see that your feelings will start to change if you act the way you want to feel. And I'm a big believer. I've seen this happen over and over again. I have another example. My grandfather used to always tell me growing up, the best time to make another sale is right after you've made the first sale. Because if you're in sales in any shape or form, and you make a sale and you're like, take a deep breath, I can relax. And he goes, no, you need that momentum, that feeling that you have to go and have confidence to make your next one. And I'm a big believer that we have to create our own feelings. We're going to have feelings that are going to hit us, and there's going to be circumstances and things that we can't control. But what we can control is our actions. And if we determine to control our actions will ultimately result in the feelings we want. And I have this. So I get up, I say every day, but it doesn't happen every day. Life gets in the way. Last night, I think we had tornado warnings coming through, so we're up at 2:30 in the morning, and my 5 a.m. wake-up call, I just wasn't doing it this morning. So 5 a.m. became 6:30, but as on a typical weekday basis, my goal is to get up around 5, and I write at 6. And every time I wake up at 5, I would say this, 20% of the time I wake up at 5, I feel great. And I'm just like, wow, wide awake. And I've been doing this for a long time. And the other 80% of the time, I need 5 to 10 minutes to, get a little bit awake, and I'm to get past my questioning of why am I waking up this early in the morning, all these types of things. And as soon as I do it, I get up and I go and I write, and I finish, writing. I write different things. So whether it's a script or a blog or a part of a book, I write that typically for about an hour, 6 to 7. When I get done with that, I feel phenomenal. The fact that I woke up early that morning and was tired is all gone. I'm ready to conquer the world, and I've done something that puts me on the track to the person I want to be and the things that I want to achieve. And it completely changes my outlook on the day and my feelings on the day as well. And those feelings will propel me through the rest of the day with a positive attitude, a positive outlook, and a positive mindset. Versus the days when, like today, I didn't get up and do that. I didn't write this morning, and I still feel great, but I'm kind of like, man, what if I would have just gotten up a little bit earlier and done this? I feel good still, but man, I would have felt even better. And so I think a lot of times we allow our feelings to dictate our actions. And that's the exact opposite thing of what we should be doing when those feelings are bad. If the feelings are good, go with it. That's what I say. But if the feelings are bad, which typically when we're talking about feelings, it's not great feelings. It's the ones that are telling you shouldn't do it, or you don't want to do it, or you can't do it, or you're going to fail if you do it. Those are the ones you got to change, and you change them through action.
Yeah, that actually leads into the next thing on the outline here, which I think is a really powerful concept, because a lot of people, they think that if they do nothing, that's kind of just like staying in the middle. But you have, in the book, you say that a step not taken is a step in the wrong direction. Uh-huh. So a lot of people have these dreams and these visions of where they want to get to, but I don't think people view it as, if I do nothing, I'm actually walking the opposite direction.
Yeah, and I like to use if you will, borrow a concept from the financial world. When you're young or in junior high, high school, college, you get taught about this concept called time value of money, which, we all know that if we start putting money in a 401k or an IRA or one of these types of tools when we're young, over time, there's compound interest. And, as the more and more time goes by, that money becomes worth more and more, even if we only are putting a small amount in consistently over time. And they say, the problem is if you start that when you're 35 or 40, you don't have as much time. And so you got to figure out how to put a lot more money in to make up all of the time that you didn't do it. And the same thing kind of rings true here, which is if you've got a big dream and a big goal, something you want to achieve, time is what's on your side with the concept of step, because the concept of step is that in the middle of everyday life, you can still take these steps. Let me be honest, I could have written step in 3 months if I was doing it full time, but I didn't have full time availability to be able to do it. So since I didn't have that, I had to start, and that took me 2 years to get the book launched. So 2 years was a lot longer than 3 months. And if I wouldn't have taken any of those steps, I would have, every day that I had not taken a step, I would have been 2 years farther away. And maybe even longer because of the more responsibilities, the more habits that I'd created. And so I just like to encourage people, like, you think if you're not taking a step forward, then you're just staying still, but you're not. If you're not taking a step forward, you're moving in the opposite direction because there's more time that is going between you and the thing you want to achieve. And your ability to achieve it, your energy, your time, your focus is continuing to be pushed further and further out, which means the hope inside of you is continually being deferred, which means you're going to feel worse about it. Like, there's all these compounding effects, kind of like, when you don't eat right, which I don't always eat right. When you don't eat right, there's a lot of potential compounding effects that can come from that one thing other than things you can see. And it's the same thing when you don't take steps. It's not just taking a step in the wrong direction. It's also your emotions, your feelings, your outlook on life. Like, all of these things are affected. And so I really do believe that when you're not taking a step in the direction of the goals, of the dreams that you have, you are definitely taking a step back, and maybe, just maybe, even a bigger step back than if you would have taken a small step forward. So I really encourage people, don't worry about the size of the step, but always be taking a step forward so that you're taking a step in the direction of your dream and you're not taking a step away from it.
Which makes a lot of sense whenever you tie that into the feelings bit. Because if you take your actions based on how you feel, most cases, I'm not going to take any action because I really don't feel like it. It's like, how many times do I would rather just sit and watch Netflix at night, or I don't want to get up at 5 a.m. because I'm a 5 a.m. guy as well. I could get a lot done. I can write a lot of code in the morning. I could write for my blog. I could do a lot of things in that time, but I usually just don't want to. I do it anyway, but I don't want to. So if I go off of my feelings, you're absolutely right. I'm going to end up in a spot where most of the stuff that I feel is important is never going to get done. I'm going to be heading backwards if I don't do anything about it. But that's all independent of or dependent on how I feel if I were to follow through on that, which I'm not going to do.
Yeah, on page 146, you say, courses can be corrected, but there is not a silver bullet for inaction. So like you said, even if you just take a small step in.
That's a good one. I like that. I haven't heard that in a while. I need to go back and read that. That's a good one.
I wrote that.
Somebody wrote. I don't know who wrote that, but I like that. That's
a wise man once said. So yeah, even if you're just taking a small step, it doesn't matter if you mess up and if you have to course correct. That's kind of how I've ended up where I'm at. Like, I never really considered myself a writer. I decided to try it. Oh, hey, I'm actually okay at writing, and that led to creating videos and public speaking and a lot of other things that actually are 100% in line with my skill set, which I never even realized. This was a really important thing that you called out here on page 174. You said that the thing we fear the most may one day be the thing that we do the best. For me, that was public speaking. I was the stereotypical person who their number one fear was public speaking. Number two was death. But I joined a Toastmasters group, and it wasn't just me doing that. It was all these little things, these one steps at a time, that led me to this space where now, like, I've been in the group, and I've kind of found my niche. And I get people who comment all the time, like, "Oh, you've obviously done this for a long time." No, actually, I just started in January, but but it's the thing that I never really saw myself doing, and I kind of discovered that through this whole process of trial and error, which again comes down to just taking that step. And I want to ask you specifically, Chris, because you mentioned one story already, just from today, where you had the tornado warning last night, and you didn't feel like getting up at 5. But that's a fairly minor thing, and you have a lot of stories in the book which kind of illustrate some of the bigger stuff that people deal with, and you share a lot of your own story in the book as well. You mentioned your grandfather. There's a lot in the book about your grandfather, who sounds like an awesome guy, and I wish I could have met him. But I'm curious, from your own experience, has there ever been a time where there was like a major life crisis in the middle of this 2 years where you just thought, maybe this isn't worth it, and you were tempted to quit, and then maybe specifically how you overcame that?
Yeah, there's a story, and I actually do write about this story in the book. During the 2 year period, it's probably about, there's actually a couple, but one, it was about a year in, maybe a year and a half in, something like that. I can't remember the exact amount of time. And my work travel had exponentially increased. I was traveling almost every week, and in my travel, it wasn't like I would go and have this free time at a hotel. I would leave my hotel room at, I don't know, 7 in the morning, and I would be out with people and clients until 11 or 12 at night. I'd get back and have to get up and go do it all over again the next day, and do that for several days in a row. And then the days you're not doing that, you're hopping on a flight and a plane and things like this. And it got to a point where I was having a really difficult time, like finding any time to do this, because I was so tired. That was really one of the big issues. I was just so tired. And I had a mentor who had written several books, and we were talking about this, and he goes, Chris, maybe you just need to take the pressure off yourself to write and finish the book. And maybe you just journal some at night. And then once you get past this season, you can pick back up your step, and your step's just going to adjust. It's just going to change for a time period. And I really didn't want to hear that, because I wanted to continue on the same step that I was taking.
That's the way it goes, isn't it?
Yeah,
Somebody
I didn't want
to something you don't want to hear.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I didn't want to take what I thought to be a step back, but because of this season of life, to do what I needed to do, I realized even my 2 hours a week wasn't going to be possible consistently. And so I needed to give myself a reprieve and say, okay, for the next couple of months, if I get to it and can write it, I'm going to still try to, but I'm going to take the pressure off of having to finish the book by X date. I didn't have that pressure on me. And I'm just going to journal when I get a chance about what happened during the day. And I know that at some point that might turn into stories that I can use. And so, that was a really good thing just mentally for me to take the pressure off of, I've been putting this pressure on myself. I got to do this, got to do this, got to do this. And had someone come in and say, your life's crazy right now. Look at this thing in a complete picture. It's going to be okay if you don't go as fast for the next 3 months. And there's a lot of times where that type of thing happens. And what we tend to do in that situation is we tend to just not step at all. And it gets really hard to pick it back up instead of finding what I call a modified step. And being okay with the fact that sometimes your step actually shrinks, when we typically think that as we go, our step should grow and increase. And it does in a lot of ways. There's times where our step has to shrink, but we can still keep taking a step. And that's something that happened to me when I was writing the book.
Yeah, just don't stop.
Yeah, exactly. It's, you may only be going 5 miles an hour instead of 15 or 20 or wherever you were, but don't stop.
I'm curious, when you found your step, like you said, and you started creating the time and space to write for the 2 hours per week, what was your vision like? What was your ideal future like, I guess, when you started that process? Did you just have the book in mind? If you go to your website, you obviously do like public speaking and stuff like that now as well. Was that part of the dream or vision, or how did that evolve to where you are today?
Yeah, actually, so going back to when I was very young, for me, public speaking, I was kind of the opposite. I love public speaking, and writing was something I didn't like to do. And so I finally got to a point, I always had a plan, if you will, or a goal that this would be something I would do as a part of my main competency. And I'd done a lot of it throughout the years. But when I got to the point of, okay, I want to get serious about my public speaking, and I'd also been wanting to do the writing as well, because I realized that was an important piece. As I took a step back and evaluated, I felt and realized that I actually needed to write the book first. And writing the book would help give me the platform that I needed from a speaking standpoint. And so really for me, the book was not necessarily my primary thing. The speaking was the primary thing that I wanted to do. And so, yeah, I did have bigger plans from the beginning, but those plans have been developing and unfolding over years now. And I think that's one of the things that, I get 3 years or 3.5 years, wherever I am from when I really started aggressively going after this. And I look back and, I realize, look, it does take time. Almost everything great, anything that we want to do and accomplish, it just takes time. But when I look back over the 3 years, it's not been bad time. And it's not been anxious time. It's been great time because I've been pursuing something I wanted to pursue the whole time. And I think that's one of the things that we forget really quickly. And so for me, yeah, I definitely always had a kind of a bigger goal. This is something I wanted to do as my life. There's other books, there's other messages, if you will, inside of me that I want to share from a book, from stage, from video courses, from a lot of different things that I do. And that's always been a part of me. I really just want to help people do, frankly, what I talk about, which is figure out how to pursue their dreams in the midst of everyday life. And it's going to go beyond the book as is. Goes into a lot of other things. But yeah, there was definitely a bigger dream from the beginning.
Chris, most times whenever people talk about writing books or they talk about or they start asking about big projects that people have completed, big achievements, they always want to know, what was the most difficult thing you encountered? Well, what if you flip that? What was the easiest part of writing the book? Because it took 2 years, and I know there's a lot of difficulties that come with that, but what were the easy parts?
That's a great question. And I really think it plays right into my whole philosophy. The easy part was just taking a step and doing that hour of writing. Like that, and putting that on my calendar and just saying, this is going to be a part of my life and my routine. Frankly, that was the easiest part. And that's really the thing that kind of set me up for everything else that I was doing. But the easiest part was the step. And that's the whole thing. There are days when the step is hard, but the step typically is not a hard thing in and of itself to do. And that's been one of my mantras that I talk to people about, people that don't believe they can do things. I say, well, let's break down your big goal into steps. And I'm pretty confident that I can always get you to agree that you believe you can take the step that we break it down into, because the step is typically easy. And it's just combining those steps together and adding consistency and time and all these things on top of them that gets, a little more, we have to put a little more commitment into that. And so for me, honestly, the step was the easiest part. That was the easiest thing to do in scheduling that step.
Just add water and time
Yeah.
and consistency.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, there's the other pieces to it, and to make sure we're taking the right step and having accountability and continuing to do it and continuing to keep our perspective on why we're doing it when we feel like it's monotonous and we're a little bit stuck in the mud, if you will. But at the end of the day, the whole principle is that step is easy. And even in taking that step, you sometimes feel like that step's hard when it typically isn't. It's just everything else that's going on in your life. And so that's a big piece of this. But the step is easy. It really is.
I like what you said, and I think it's worth going back and teasing this out. You mentioned that you put it on your calendar. And I think that your calendar, for a lot of people, is kind of sacred space. And when something goes on your calendar, it indicates, at least to me, that this thing is a priority. And I think where a lot of people get stuck is they say, oh yeah, this thing is a priority. But if how you're spending your time isn't confirming that, then you're not going to get any progress made on that goal or that vision that you say is a priority.
Yeah. And, we have a rule with my friends, family, and the rule is simply this. We always want to hang out with our friends and our family, right? But life's busy, so every time we do hang out with them, we have a rule that we will schedule our next time to hang out on the calendar before we leave. And that allows us to have consistency. There is something powerful about putting something down on a calendar, or however you schedule your life. We all have different ways of scheduling it. I think probably 70% of us now use GCal, but for those 30% that don't, or maybe it's only 10% that don't, you have a way of doing it. Write it on your calendar, write it somewhere, wherever it is. But there's something about being intentional about scheduling, because when we schedule, we start to eliminate the excuses we would typically have to not do the step or do the task or the action that we're wanting to take. And our goal with scheduling is really just to eliminate more barriers that we won't do it.
So you have in the book 4 ways to accelerate your time, or 4 ways to accelerate your step. Number 1 is time. Number 2 is team. Number 3 is learning. Number 4 is kickstart. You want to kind of walk us through those real quick?
Yeah, so just using my example on an hour, well, I guess it's 2 hours a week, an hour a day, twice a week. An easy way to accelerate my step would have been simply to bump that up to 2 hours a day or 4 hours a week. If we add time to our step, typically that gives us the ability to take a larger and longer step. And so time is one of the easiest ways, but it's also one of the more difficult things that we can do because time is precious, right? But I always say, and I always like to mention the fact that, time is a really easy way, even if you add just a small amount of time. We always typically start with this hour, and, maybe we jump it up to an hour 15, an hour 10, start to inch the time up a little bit. And that's a great way to be able to take a bigger step, because we still got to take the same amount of steps no matter what. But when you have time, you can take more steps or a bigger step, however you want to talk about it, in that time, because you have more time.
There's a concept from another book that we read, Joe, maybe you're thinking the same thing, from Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath, where they have this term called ooching, where you're kind of just stepping a little bit further out into the unknown. And I get that's what I thought of when you're talking about extending your time, just another 5, 10, 15 minutes. Is ooching your time.
Oh yeah, I do it in software all the time. So we're building something, and well, I shouldn't say we. I'm building something, and then I know that the first round is gonna have a lot of bugs, gonna have a lot of problems. It's gonna take longer to build than I always budget to begin with, even if I double the time I think it's gonna take. Always happens. And it seems like if I continue to add more time to it, slowly, or I continue to grow the scope of it slowly, start with something very basic, and then build on to it over time once I've got some people into a given software, it always goes way better, if I slowly build it up as opposed to trying to bite off a whole bunch all at once.
Yeah, definitely. So the second one here is team. You want to kind of talk us through that one?
Sure. Yeah, team, a lot of these kind of build off the same principle, but with team, it's just simply this. So for instance, with me right now, I think I kind of mentioned to you guys, I have somewhere between 8 and 10 people on my team right now. I use some freelancers and contractors to help me do a lot of the work that I do, and this is on my chriscapehart.co writing, speaking courses. And then I have another company, a tech company that I work in as well full time. So we have a team over there. And what I realized is that as I was wanting to grow this part of my life, this business, if you will, I didn't have the time because of my other responsibilities to add. So since I couldn't add the time, I had to find someone else that could do the task. And so it's pretty simple. If you want to accelerate what you're doing, you can find a team. And, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing a team. There's volunteer-based teams, there's paid teams, and there's things somewhat in the middle. But at the end of the day, at some point, if you're doing something, you're going to need more time. Anything that's growing and that you're doing well, you're going to need more time than you can physically put into it, even if you have all the time available to you in a day, because there's still a limited number of time. And while there is a limited number of people in the world, there's a lot more people than there is time you have in a single day. And when you start building a team, you can start to accelerate your efforts and multiply your efforts by having other people take tasks off your plate. I'm a big fan of it. I'm a big fan of a book called Essentialism. And it, I think a lot of the principles, we share a lot of the principles in my book. And the point is this, like in this company of mine and what I do with chriscapehart.co, writing is something that really I'm the only one that can really create the content. And I have people that help me edit it and do things like that and make it even better, but I'm the only one that can create it. Like, it's in my head. So I've got to somehow get that down. Going back and forth on emails and managing calendars and things like this. Those are things that other people can do that don't require me. And so I have to make conscious decisions to find the things that my team can do that will allow me to do the things that actually really matter to what I'm trying to pull off and accomplish. And so team is valuable. So that's what I would talk about with team.
That can be really scary because, for me personally anyways, the tendency is to think that I'm the only one who really knows 100% how this thing works. And when you start adding additional people who don't have all the benefit of your experience and your knowledge, and obviously standard operating procedures and documentation can help with this is the way you do things, but there's always those edge cases and there's always bumps in the road. But I guess what you're saying here, and I agree from an intellectual standpoint, I just have trouble doing this practically, I guess, is that those bumps in the road and those difficulties and the problems that may arise, once you figure those out, it's worth it in the long run.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, frankly, there's always somebody that's better than us at what we're trying to do. It's one of the reasons why when I was writing Step, so I wrote Step, I wrote the entire first draft myself, and then I had what's called a developmental editor that helped me take my draft and develop it, and then I had a copy editor that comes in and actually makes sure that everything is, the way it needs to be from a copy standpoint, from a grammar standpoint. And, I went through 3 developmental editors. One of the reasons it took so long to do the book, it didn't actually take me the whole 2 years to write the original content for the book. But what I ran into was I needed help developing some of my concepts and figuring out the right ways to develop them in ways that people would want to read, would want to engage with. And it took me going through 3 or 4 different tests with editors to find a person. And the person I ended up working with, her name's Maria. She's phenomenal. She did a book for a guy named John Acuff. She did another book for a lady named Sophie Amoruso. And both of those books at the time were in my category and were New York Times bestsellers. And so for me, she is a much better writer. She actually did one recently for Simon Sinek as well, called, I think, Leaders Eat Last. And so what I did is I actually found people that were better than me in some cases to do even the things that I wanted to do, which made me better at doing the thing that I wanted to do, which was writing. And so a lot of times, we, and I'm very guilty of this, we think more highly of ourselves than we ought, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. When a lot of times there's people out there that can do the things that we feel like is intimidating with just a little bit of training, a little bit of work, or frankly, in the case of Maria and an editor, they're just better than me. And I started learning from her, and that's one of the things I think that made the book good.
I think there's a lot of value in knowing where your limits are and being willing to seek out people who are better at you in some areas. Like it's scary to delegate because I know the whole system and I know what needs done and I know how to do it. And it's going to take me twice as long to train and teach someone else to do it. Yeah. And I hate that. But at the same time, I feel like you have to do it once and have a good experience with it to realize that you can trust and find other people who are better at certain areas. Like I can come up with a design for a logo, but it will take me 3 or 4 months to do it. I'm going to learn Illustrator more than I care to know, and it's probably going to be okay. But if I'd foot the bill to pay somebody to do it and just get it off my shoulders, I'm going to feel a lot better about it in the long run. But
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's just being willing to get it out there, and being willing to trust somebody who's better than me typically results in something way better in the end.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is this. Listen, I could write a whole book on team and on management. There's been volumes of books written about how to do it, so it's not necessarily an easy thing to do. But obviously, any company, if you will, or organization that's successful has to figure it out because they need multiple people, and so it is able to be done. And it can be done and can be done well. And I think it's actually easier to do on a smaller level because you don't have as many wild cards, if you will. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely it can be a scary thing jumping into that, but being willing to trust other people. And then I think this is what happens is people go, well, okay, I'm going to trust them to do this. And then they come back and they don't do it exactly the way you want to. And you get frustrated instead of realizing you need to work with them, challenge them, encourage them, and know that just like maybe in a situation where you were asked to do something and didn't do it perfectly the first time because you needed a little bit of extra coaching, tweaking on the process and things like that, and somebody helped you and gave you that time, if you do the same with the other person, there's a good chance you can get them to a place where they can actually accomplish it and take that load off of you. But sometimes we think, I can just hand it to somebody and then walk away and it's done. And that rarely happens.
Having kids is great practice for this, I feel, because you have to say it over and over and over again.
Yeah, sure.
Third one, you kind of touched on it a little bit. You mentioned it at least a couple times when you're talking about the team, but that is learning. You want to talk us through that one?
Sure. I think one of the things and Joe was talking a little bit about this, if you know Illustrator and you know design, it might be quicker for you to do your logo design than to have someone else do it. If you don't, you don't. And sometimes you're in situations where you don't have the funds or the people that are willing to do it for you for free, so you've got to do it. And so one of the things that we can always do is we can always educate ourselves. There are so many resources available to do this free these days, and I'm paid as well. But there's so many things to do. I've been integrating this into a lot of the talks that I've done recently, and just talking about, hey, what's the difference between you and a doctor? And people start talking about a lot of different things, and I say, well, the only difference between you and a doctor is the time you spent learning. And I like to demystify the fact that sometimes when we learn how to do something and we learn how to do it right, we eliminate a lot of the time we spent doing it wrong. And so sometimes just taking the time to learn, and I'm not good at this one. I jump into things before I learn typically, and I learn on the fly. Take some time to learn. Take some time to get educated, and go take some courses on Illustrator before you just jump right into it, and you'll probably save yourself 5 or 6 hours, or maybe 20. I don't know how many you might save. And so I think a big thing is you can narrow the gap between you and a step that you might not be today capable of taking because of education, with just a little bit of education or learning. And we should always feel free to do that, and feel free to make learning a part of our step, and not feel like that is a non-worthwhile exercise. It's actually a very worthwhile exercise, because when we learn something, even if we're going to delegate it later, knowing the ins and outs of how something works actually helps us be a better manager and a better delegator of making that happen.
Nice. Yeah, I think that from the how to do a specific task perspective, there's a lot of value in this, but I also think that it's got broader application just in the whole idea of personal growth. I mean, that's really the whole idea behind this podcast. Is Joe and I decided that we were going to read these books because I found an article that said that the top CEOs, the difference that separated the top from everybody else was the fact that they read 24 books a year. So we're like, we're going to read a book every couple of weeks, and we're going to hold each other accountable to stuff, and we're going to continue to grow. And the things that we learn are going to affect the choices that we make and how we approach problems. It's essentially going to increase the size of the toolbox that we've got to work with. Yeah. Jim Rohn said that your level of success will rarely exceed your level of personal development, because success is something you attract by the person that you become. And you have to be intentional about becoming a better person. You have to consistently keep learning. But that's kind of a tangent. We'll go back to specifically how to accelerate your step. The fourth one here, and this one I think is not quite as clear as the other three, so maybe you can explain what you mean by kickstart.
Yeah, so a kickstart, and I'll give an example from when I was writing the book. So I did my 2 hours a week, and then every once in a while I would start to get a little more time by taking a weekend afternoon or a Saturday morning and going and writing. But sometimes we need, and I couldn't think of a better way to describe this than calling it a kickstart. But I'll give you an example. One of the kickstarts that I did was I took an entire week off, and instead of taking a vacation, which would have been a nice thing to do, I took a week, and all I did is I worked my, if you will, 8 hours a day, and I wrote. And so I was able to do, roughly 40 hours, what it would have taken me, 10 weeks to do in 1 week. And that was a little bit of a kickstart that did a couple things for me. It gave me some momentum again. It gave me that time and that place to focus. And when I talk about a kickstart, the reason I call it out as something different is I define it in the book as something that is not sustainable over the long term. It wasn't at that time in my life sustainable to do 40 hours a week on writing for any significant period of time. I could do it for a week or two, but beyond that, I had to get back to my other realities to pay the bills and do the things that I needed to do. And so typically, a kickstart revolves around you're in a position where you need to do something to really push yourself over some kind of hump, over some kind of hill, some edge, something you haven't been able to get past because you haven't had enough time to focus on that thing or to learn that thing or whatever it is, build that team maybe. And so you take and you work hard, and maybe you're still working and you're just working, you get home at, let's say it's 5, and you work from 5 to midnight every day for a week or 2 weeks, and you're not going to be able to continue that pace forever. Maybe some people can, typical people can't continue that pace forever. So you find something that you can do for a short period of time that's going to move you a lot faster down the road. It's going to give you momentum, it's going to give you excitement, and it's going to help you start to see a new milestone or a finish line, if you will, in your book, or task or goal or dream or whatever it is. But in my example, I was talking about when I did it with the book.
That's awesome. I like that a lot, and I think that is more sustainable than what we had. The previous book we did was the 10x rule, and that was one of the things that I had issues with in that book. I like the book a lot, but he mentions in there, Grant Cardone is the author, that you have an unlimited supply of energy and creativity to throw out your problems. I'm like, well, I don't know that that's necessarily sustainable. And I get the point that he was trying to make, but really the fact is you need that margin. And I think that's really important to recognize that sometimes it's okay to slow your step for a season, like you said. And then there's also going to be other seasons where, for this particular week, for example, you're going to apply 10x effort to move this thing forward. And I think that really leads into the other thing here I wanted to really get your perspective on is on page 176. You said, everything we want to accomplish will require more effort than we first thought. So my question to you is, how much more effort did the book take than you initially first thought?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I may answer that indirectly and just say, there's always a statement. I've been in the startup world, software startup world for a long time and done quite a few startups there. And there's always this saying when you go to raise money that it's always going to take double the money and double the time to do anything. And a lot of times I found that to be even somewhat generous. It's sometimes even more than that. And typically with time, it's usually more than that. And, so when I set out to write the book, I'll be honest, in the beginning, I really didn't know. I really didn't know how long it was going to take. And so for me, the tough thing about that was I was sitting there going, I have no clue. And then after about 4 to 6 weeks in, I started realizing how much I could write. So I started doing the math. And I started realizing, man, I think I can get this book done in 6 to 8 months. Because I realized how many pages I was able to write every day once I got into a groove. And then I'd written a couple chapters, and then I went back and I'd done an outline. And so then I was kind of able to track this thing and go, oh, I think I can have this sucker finished this year. And it took me an extra year. So
spot on.
So I was spot on the double the time and double, double the money. We won't talk about the money because it was probably more than that. But but it was a little bit different because I was, doing it on my own. So that it's so true. Everything takes time and effort. And especially, it's funny, you get around old guys that have been in business or have done something before. And when you're young, you start talking about an idea, something you want to do. And they're like, well, it's going to take you this long to do this and this long to do this. And you're just going, you're like, you don't really know what you're talking about. You're doing things the old way. You don't really understand. And then once you've done a few of them and you've started a few businesses and you've written a book or two, you realize there are so many things that even when you know everything it takes to do it, you don't really know because there's a lot of unforeseen events. There's a lot of just challenges and loopholes. I mean, like I said, so I also run a software company and we work with a lot of really large brands and build apps and web apps and native apps for them. We did one for Vogue this last year. We did a lot for L'Oreal and Hilton, a few others. And I've been working on a project with a client I've been working to get a project with a client. We've been talking about it. They've been wanting to do it for almost 3 years. And I like if you would have told me it would have taken 3 years, and I can't count how many, literally thousands of emails, flights, trips to get this project, I would have thought you were crazy. But one of the things I've realized, and you hear people say, big companies move slow, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I've realized how true that is and realized all the inner workings and all the different people that have to have sign-offs and approvals and budget cycles. And if you miss a budget cycle, you're a year off now. And so there's all these things that with everything we do, it's hard to know. And it's hard to know. I mean, you could plan it perfectly. Like I said, when it comes to closing a big software deal, you plan it perfectly and somebody goes on vacation and you don't get your deal signed, and it moves into a next budget cycle, and you're a year out. Like, how do you control that? And that's the thing, I think, when people start companies and when they, go after dreams, there's things like that they don't realize exist. And it's those things that throw them off track. And so when you aren't realistic about that in the beginning, you can really easily get discouraged. And you can get discouraged because you've put this time frame, which I am a big believer in putting a time frame on the goals we want to achieve. I think you should do that. But when we aren't realistic about it, we really can do a disservice to ourselves. I'd rather kind of be that under promise over deliver when it comes to my personal goals than the other, and let people that we're staying accountable with or that are on our team challenge us to move faster than what we expect. Versus what you don't want is that person that's a mentor that's done it before saying your expectations are too big. You want that person saying, no, they need to be bigger. And this is, I think, a delicate balance that it's hard to quantify the exact right and wrong way to do it. But at the end of the day, anyone that's accomplished anything of significance, I put $10 on it every time. So if I lose money on, maybe I only lose it once. That they're going to say it took more time than they thought. It took more effort than they thought. It was harder than they thought.
So, Mike, are you listening to this? Because you and I have had some stuff back and forth with some clients, and it's taking way longer than Mike thought it would. That's life.
It's life. It's life. And I'll tell you what, I'll speak to that one situation, that one client right now. So that one client, the deals that we have done with that client now are exponentially larger than any other deals we've done. And so you look at it and you go, when you have more time, you have more effort into something, a lot of times the payoff can be bigger too. So
it's the way it works. I don't know how many times I've had conversations with clients and I get all the way to the end and everybody's a go. I send over the contract and then it sits for 6 months. It's like,
oh yeah.
Yep.
Oh yeah.
All right. I just plan on, I don't do anything until everything is signed. Not going to touch it.
Yep. Oh, so true. So true.
So in that particular situation, how do you keep stepping when your dream maybe is that big business deal and it's kind of out of your control? How do you maintain momentum? Any tips for maintaining momentum when it doesn't look like the ball's in your court?
Yeah, I mean, here's what I'd say. We could dig into that for a long time, and every situation is a little bit different. In the case of a business deal, if you will, or in a company, one of the things there is just consistency. You want to consistently stay on the radar and be the top of mind person for whoever that client is or that relationship is. So you find things creative and unique to do along the path to still let them know you're there, you care, and you're waiting for them whenever they're ready. Without being, rude in that case. And it can be things like sending nice little notes, sending little gifts, being respectful. And when the time comes, those people will remember and they'll think of you as a percentage. Obviously, there's always going to be situations where it doesn't happen. So do that. And then the other thing is this. If we're talking business for a second, it's don't bet your whole load on one client or two clients.
Right.
Have backups. That's why there's something in sales and business called a pipeline, right? You have a pipeline of other clients because you don't know what's going to come through when. And so, you've got to use the law of averages, if you will, and law of numbers in those kind of situations where, if you're counting on one thing. So, for instance, if you're wanting to get a book deal and you're talking to one guy, and it's your first book deal, it's probably not the right thing to do. You should be talking to every single person you can about the book deal. Because there's power in that, and there's power in numbers, and that everybody, from a negotiation standpoint, always says, man, if you can ever get two people negotiating for you or against you, that's the cream of the crop. Well, the way you do that is you have like 20 people you're talking to. And sometimes you get lucky and get two people at the same time that want the same thing from you, and you're able to negotiate them. But you don't typically get that from just talking to two people.
Right. This isn't exactly in line with the book, but one of the other things that stood out to me
was
one of the other things that stood out to me was and you mentioned it in that last section there, you mentioned giving gifts, and you kind of talk in the book about, sounds like you are a pretty extravagant gift giver.
I try. We try. I mean, do what we can.
Do you mind explaining just a little bit the philosophy behind that? Because I think it's really important, and I think that a lot of people don't realize the importance of the thoughtfulness of the gifts, and you kind of use it in the book to talk about the intentionality and showing people that you care real simple ways. And you mentioned, like different clients and things like that, but maybe just kind of walk through the thought process there a little bit.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm actually in the process of writing about this specifically for another project, but at the end of the day, pretty much everything you do in life has some form of relationship as a part of it, whether it's a customer relationship, a friend relationship, a family relationship, or whatever. And people just want to be valued. They want to feel respected. They want to feel like they're thought about. They're on the top of your mind. And so when you take those things that we typically apply into a family situation, and a lot of us don't do them well in a family situation, so that's an issue in and of itself. But we take those kind of same principles and we apply them to everything we do in business or wherever we are, we find that people really respond well to it. People respond well when they feel like you really care. And you show you really care by the things you do for people, whether it be a gift, a way you communicate, the way you talk to them, the way you prepare. All of these things make up a bigger picture of whether or not a person feels valued by you. And when people feel valued, they want to work with you, they want to do business with you, they want to find ways to help you be successful because you've found ways to help them be successful. And so, what we've done from a business standpoint, what I've always done, is we've tried to go out of our way to surprise and delight people with things. I mean, we'd send cakes to people, we send cookies to people, we send books to people, we send framed pictures to people. We do all kinds of things just to show people that we really care. And it's not just about their business, it's more than that. And people have always been really receptive to that. And I think, when it comes to building your team, when it comes to everything we do, if we treat people that way, it will come back on us in great measure when we least expect it.
Totally agree. And I think that's a really overlooked point, especially when you're approaching your dream or your vision through the lens of what can I do to make sure that this thing gets done and accelerate it. Like you said, whatever you give tends to come back to you in greater multitudes in my experience. So I think that it's really important to call that out, that you're not on this journey alone. We talked about in the productivity project, Chris Bailey, like people are the reason for productivity, and everything that you do is going to impact other people, which is really the reason for the step. And maybe we'll kind of end here, and then you can add any additional closing thoughts that you wanted. But on page 210, you say that we are the answers to the world's problems. All we have to do is start stepping. So I guess I want to just leave it as my final thought here. Everybody who's listening to the podcast, I believe that there's a lot of people who fall into that 81% of Americans who want to write that book and just start doing it, because you have something for other people. The world needs what is inside of you. Yeah,
and I ended the book on a chapter called The Most Powerful Step, and I went through a couple different iterations on the name of that. One of the iterations was a step for someone else, and I really believe that our step has an impact beyond what it does for us. I believe that our step has an impact in the way that it opens up other people's minds to what's possible for them, in the way that it empowers other people. And so we are our own person, but our step or our non-step is going to affect people positively or negatively. And when we think about it in that perspective, when we do our best to do things for other people and take a step because there's other people watching us, whether it's family, friends, coworkers, or people we don't even know yet, and we do that, we're going to make the world a better place. And I've been working on kind of my personal vision and mission recently, and kind of realigning it. And one of the things I realize is this: it's if we do our best to make ourselves the best version of ourselves, we will make the world the best version of the world. And it's our responsibility, and it's only our responsibility, to make ourselves the best version of ourselves, and we can do that one step at a time. And I want to encourage everybody out there, no matter what your dream, no matter what your goal, no matter what it is you've wanted to do, you haven't done, you failed at, and didn't want to try it again, start taking steps again today towards that dream and towards that goal. It's going to make a difference in your life, and you can do it. You can accomplish those things that you've always dreamed and always wanted to. I believe in you. We're here for you, and if there's anything that we can do to help, please let us know.
Awesome. So maybe jump into action items, Joe.
Sure.
All right. So the very last thing you have in the book is once you've read it, give it to somebody else. So that was my first action item, and that one I am proud to say is done.
Good.
Second action item I had, when you were talking about the season where you got the advice to just journal the things that you were getting rather than creating the time to write, really reminded me of the importance of journaling, which I completely get from an intellectual perspective. I know how important it is, and I still find myself falling off the wagon from time to time. So that's where I'm at right now. I need to get back into the habit of journaling every single night, not missing those days, because whenever I miss a day, that really I'm what I recognize from reading this book is that I have robbed myself of the opportunity to learn and to glean and to even repurpose the things that I discovered and learned throughout that day. That's completely gone because I'm not going to just remember that down the road. And a lot of that stuff has a lot of value in the things that I would write and create. So having a record of that is very important.
Yeah, one of the things that I have on my list, and I just have one here that doesn't speak to Chris in any way. It's simply one big glaring thing I need to do. I have 2 decent-sized projects that I've been picking and choosing what needs to come next on them, but not far enough, I guess would be the way to say it. So I've been defining not necessarily a proverbial mile, but like a proverbial quarter mile that I've been trying to work towards, but I haven't broken them down far enough to where I can say, okay, today, this hour, this is what I need to do. Like I haven't gone that far with it, which is weird because I feel like that's something I do. But it's weird how I have something I think I do, but I don't do it because somebody like Chris is able to help me see that I don't do what I think I do. If you follow that train of thought at all. That was a weird way to say that. Sorry about that. So I have 2 big projects that I need to break down a little bit further so that I can actually make progress on them. I don't think I can share what those are. I wish I could. That would be easier, but I can't do that. Sorry. That's what I got, Mike.
All right. So upcoming books?
Oh, right. Because what is it? Next time around, it's my choice. Yep. And I selected Grit by Angela Duckworth, which is one that I have seen recommended in a number of places. New York Times bestseller. It has accolades from Daniel Gilbert, Susan Cain, Malcolm Gladwell, Dan Heath, who we read Decisive here. So lots of great feedback I've heard on that one. Kind of following some of the same thread we've been jumping into lately with success and taking the next step, as we've seen here today. And then how do I have the power of the passion and perseverance to continue working those next steps into my life. So that's what the book's about. That's the goal. And I'm going to drag Mike along with me.
I started this one, and I really like it so far. My next book, then, is The Sleep Revolution by Arianna Huffington, which was the one that you were with me when I bought in Woodstock last summer. And I saw it on my shelf. And I said I was going to make Joe read this with me, so it's time to do it.
That was like 3-4 months ago you told me you were going to make me do that. Or is it longer than that?
Exactly. So decided to follow through on that.
It's about time. Considering I have a 3-month-old and don't sleep. Thanks for that.
Yeah, so maybe you can get some tips.
There you go. Gap books. So I haven't picked up Grit yet. I'm planning to read a book before I get to that one. And I picked up this morning The Power of Myth by Joseph Campbell. This is actually a transcript of a conversation that was held between Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell about symbolism and mythology and its impact and prevalence in our culture today. So it was a conversation in, when was it? Late 80s? Mid 80s, 85, 86, somewhere in that range. Anyway, should be interesting. I'm curious. Symbolism and mythology in our world. Where is it?
My Gap book is Unsubscribed by Jocelyn, not sure how to say the last name, Glay.
Yeah.
It's a book about email, which is one of my favorite topics.
You're obsessed.
I am, but I actually saw this recommended on tools and toys, I believe. It looks very interesting. There's a lot of illustrations, and it's got a very peculiar art style that I think is going to provide a little bit more entertaining and interesting take on the whole topic of email. So I'm interested to see what they have to say, but I've heard a lot of good things about this book. It looks like an easy read.
Cool. Chris, what are you reading? I'm sure, authors always read a lot. So
Yeah. It's kind of a mix between reading and creating. Actually, Grit's one that's on my reading list. I haven't had a chance to read it yet. I've seen a bit of Sleep Revolution by Ariana Huffington. One that I recently read that I really love is I always get this wrong, The War of Art. Is it, because there's The Art of War, which I've read as well, but it's The War of Art, which is a phenomenal book. But Grit is actually one of my next up books that I need to read.
Nice. You gonna read it with us?
I might. Yeah, I might. I just might do that.
There you go. We did The War of Art, didn't we, Mike? That was
that was like the second one that we did.
Number 2, I think.
That was a really, really good book.
Yeah, big
I
fan
really
of
like that one.
You'll like it.
So, Chris, where can people go to find you online?
Yeah, chriscapehart.co. That's pretty simple. You can find me there. I'm on every other channel, Instagram, Facebook, and pretty much all of them. It's just /Chris Capehart. I've been around the tech world long enough that I was fortunately able to get my name on almost everything. So you can find me there. But yeah, chriscapehart.co, not .com. I've been going back and forth. There's a man, if you search Chris Capehart, he's a magician, and he's had chriscapehart.com. He's a lot older than I am, for a long time. And I've even called him back in the day to get it and never could get him to give it to me. And then all of a sudden, probably about 2 years ago, it switched, and now it's a dentist blog. And I've been trying to, with not a lot of updates, I've been trying to get the .com from him for a long time too, but can't seem to make the connection. So I'm having no luck with the .com, so I'm going hardcore on .co these days.
Nice. Just got to take the next step.
Yeah, take the next step. So find me there. I'm really excited about it. We are in the middle of a complete redesign and redevelop of the website. I've been seeing some of the initial comps. I'm really excited about it. Got a lot of new features and functionality. We're also in the process of launching a year-long program, which I think we just landed on the name of today, so I'm not going to say anything yet. But we're really excited about that, to really take people through, the kind of process of implementing STEP in their life. And it's a lot of fun things going on, so be watching over the next couple of months. You'll see new branding, new logos, new website design, a lot of new things you can sign up and get. So it's going to be fun.
Cool. So we've mentioned a lot of books here, and we always try to get some listener feedback on what you'd like to hear us go through. So if you have a suggestion that you want us to go through, you can do that over on our website, bookworm.fm/recommend, and you can find a full list of the books we've been through, the ones we've got planned for the future, as well as any that have been recommended so far.
Nice. And if you want to help people find the show, help us out a lot if you would go to iTunes and leave us a quick review. It really, really bugs me that when you go search for Bookworm, there's a radio station that has a Bookworm podcast that shows up in front of ours, even though it's a really long title. So help us get Bookworm at the top of the search results by going and leaving a review. It helps other people find the show. And we take all of your feedback really seriously. We want to implement the things that people have recommended. So the iTunes reviews are a great place to do that.
So a great big thank you to you, Chris, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks, guys. Thanks so much for having me today. It was a pleasure.
If you guys want, just go take a look at Chris's stuff online. He's got a lot of great stuff out there. We really appreciate you joining us today, Chris. And if you are reading along with us, the next book up on the list is Grit. So you can pick that up, and we will go on a journey with Angela Duckworth.